everyone, Aimer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time I am reviewing Season 6, Episode 16, which is called Stone Pillow. Now I actually had to go and look this up. What does stone pillow mean exactly? I mean, I have an idea of what it means, but the significance of it. Apparently there's a story from the Bible about it. But from what I read in the Mission Impossible dossier, it has to do with a song which is called the Prisoner's Song, where the songwriter talks about prisoners laying their head on pillows of stone because they don't have anything else to lay their heads on. And I guess that's what we're talking about here. So this one starts out with two guys watching some film footage. One is private investigator Larry Edison, and the other is underworld boss Vincent Vocek. Edison has Vocek on tape leaving a building at the time a murder was committed. He killed an informant, with a newspaper stand showing the date. Edison stumbled upon this while tailing another man and now wants to make a deal for his continued silence. Edison confirms he's going to jail for a while on an unrelated charge, but he stored the negative safely with instructions to get it to the DA if anything happens to him. And he wants $5,000 every month as long as he and Vocek are still alive. Jim gets instructions from a forest ranger using some spy speak. The mission is simple: find that negative and get it to the authorities. So in the apartment scene, we learn that the IMF has found out that a woman named Leona Prescott knows where the negative is. That's who was entrusted with it. But she had a car accident and died, unbeknownst to Edison or Vocek. And a whole bunch of arrangements have been made in the prison where Edison is about to go. Jim reminds the team that Vocek assuredly has operatives in the prison, so they have to be extra careful. Edison is brought into the prison and meets with acting warden Barney. Chief Guard Joe Fort has recommended that Edison be put in solitary, claiming it's for his protection. But since neither of them can identify any specific threats, Barney denies the request and puts Edison in Gen Pop with cerebral inmate Jim, who says he's referred to as the Professor. Fort is one of Vocek's men and informs him about what's going on. Vocek sternly tells him that he's responsible for Edison's safety, and failure to do so is not an option if he values his own life. That night, prison guard Willie roams the halls, and Edison pretends not to notice Jim putting something under a bedpost. The next morning in the exercise yard, Willie sets off a squib near Edison, and Fort again pleads his case to put Edison into solitary. Somebody just took a shot at him. But they can't find any evidence of a gun, any metal, nothing. The new prison counselor, Casey, says that Edison shows some signs of depression, and isolating him wouldn't be good for his mental health. Barney and Casey start to realize the truth about Fort, and Barney says he'll make sure that Fort is off duty when they need him to be. Fort comes to Vocek's office with a letter from Edison to Leona that he intercepted, planted by the IMF, of course, and Vocek gets one of his men to check it out. It seems like an innocent note. It alludes to, hey, I hope the baby's okay. But Vocek notes the address. Edison laments his plight in the prison cell and finds a piece of Jim's hidden notes, which are an escape plan. No gun is found, even after a thorough search, and Edison's anxiety starts to get to him. In his anger, he knocks over Jim's chess pieces, which have parts inside to make a small gun. And he insists on getting in on Jim's plan rather than be a sitting duck. Casey has a group therapy session attended by Jim, Edison, a few others, and Jim pulls out his gun, takes her as a hostage, knocking out the guard and managing to get out of the building. Willie sounds the alarm and takes some errant shots as the three manage to find an underground passage to a waiting car. Edison wants to keep Casey with them for protection, but Jim knocks him out and puts him in the car, telling Casey to misdirect the chase, which she does. Jim heads to a secluded spot where he puts Edison in another car, spilling gasoline in the original one and setting it off ablaze in a cliff. Edison wakes up about 14 hours later in an unknown apartment where Jim shows him that the two of them are presumed dead. Edison says he's overdue to make a phone call, which is a matter of life and death, and Jim allows it. Edison calls Leona's place where Vocek's thugs are searching, but they don't pick up because, of course, they don't want to leave any evidence of their presence there. Edison is still very weak from the IMF-administered drug Jim used on him earlier. Jim offers to help him do whatever needs to be done, but Edison says, nah, this might be a Vocek trap, so he turns him down. Meanwhile, Vocek's men don't find anything helpful in Leona's apartment, and Vocek wonders why she hasn't done anything now that Edison has been reported dead. Wojciech tells them to keep watching for her, and Casey prepares to become Leona in the IMF van, where Willie and Barney haven't heard from Jim and are getting a little worried. Casey as Leona returns, finally, to the building, and Wojciech's men inform him. She finds Edison's letter in her mailbox and is accosted and smacked by the thugs for the film, warning her that worse things will happen if she doesn't turn it over to them, and then they head away. Casey is worried, but Barney assures her the thugs won't do anything drastic until the film surfaces. After another nap, Jim wakes Larry, and this time Casey as Leona answers the phone, not believing it's Larry because of the news about him being dead, but telling him that she did as he instructed and turned the film over to the authorities, since she had no idea about his escape. Jim tells Larry that from the snippets he heard of the conversation, he's figured out what's going on and tells him to think it through. Leona likely is going into business for herself, taking over Larry's deal from Wojciech. Larry confirms that he's on the right track with what he's thinking, so Jim says he has an idea. He calls the IMF van and stages a conversation where he pretends to talk to someone in the DA's office while Willie updates him on what's happened. Jim tells Larry that the DA hasn't moved on Wojciech, confirming Jim's idea about Leona. Jim drives Larry over to Leona's building, where Wojciech sees him enter to confront Casey as Leona. He demands the key, and she tells him, "Get it yourself." He leads her over to the bedroom, where Casey pulls out a gun she planted in her purse. Larry scoffs at the threat, but Leona says he's already presumed dead, so she loses nothing by shooting him. Just as she's about to pull the trigger, Jim arrives behind Larry just in time and shoots first. Edison figures Jim knows way more than he's letting on. Jim says he just wants a share of some of Edison's money. Just as they hear Casey calling someone with her dying breaths and telling that person he knows. Larry takes apart the post from a chair and finds the key, taking the gun, telling Jim to stay at the apartment as he heads away. Jim alerts Barney and Willie, who follow, with Wojciech not far behind. Edison heads to a studio warehouse and finds his well-hidden prize, just as Wojciech's men show up. Barney and Willie take two of them out, and Edison feigns surrender, saying he's out of bullets, and Jim arrives to cover the third guy. Edison starts to shoot, but finds that his bullets are blanks. Jim takes the film as the cops corral all the bad guys. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this episode a grade of B-. It's on the border with C+, but I give it an advantage over some of the episodes to which I've given a C+, because it has the advantage of a very well-crafted and cogent story. And I'm going to explain. What's good about it, I really like this kind of plan and this kind of plot. It reminds me of a lot of other episodes that we've seen, where the IMF must get some information that has been deemed critical for some reason. Often lives are at stake, often it's for, some other reason. Some of those episodes, they have a time factor, like Operation Rogosh, from very, very early in the series. The IMF only has a certain amount of time before, something bad is going to happen. Some of them have, this factor of, the guy we're going against has nothing to lose and doesn't care, like Time Bomb. This one is one that I actually like a little bit better. It reminds me of the episode in season 4, to which I gave an S, which was called Submarine. You can go and find that review. And I think that is, without question, one of the finest episodes of Mission Impossible that there is. And I mentioned that the strength of that episode too wasn't really, the characters or anything like that. It was the story and how the story was so well crafted. And I see that in this episode. This is not anywhere nearly as good as Submarine, of course, but I do see some of that here. The big similarity that I see is that this is one of those episodes where the IMF has to get information. The whole problem that the IMF has, the difficulty that they face, is based on the idea that there is no way this guy is going to give up the information. There's a huge disincentive. What in the world, just like in Submarine, where, there was an old Nazi SS officer, there's nothing in the world you could do to him or offer him to give up the information that he has kept secret for 25 years. In this case, there's nothing that you could do or offer Larry Edison to give up the information that he has, right? Because he knows that he's going to be killed if that information is made public. So the IMF has to find a way. And in Submarine they did, and here they did as well. This one also has a bit of a feel like Invasion earlier in this season for a whole lot of reasons, and I'll mention some of those as well as we go on. Recycled sets are part of it. And again, it's the whole look and feel of season 6, I would say, that contributes to that. Again, the Invasion was another one of those episodes where it's like we need to get critical information in order to prevent something from happening. And what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to fool the guy into giving it to us or leading us to it. So there's that similarity. The methodology that they use in Invasion is probably a lot similar to what they do here. The methodology is not like they do in Submarine, although the reasons behind it, the disincentivization, is there. So this is a little bit of a mix of both of those. In this one, the IMF has to convince Larry Edison that he's lost his prize and he's lost any potential leverage that he has. Those are the two things that are keeping him going, right? He says that as long as I'm alive and as long as I'm the only one who knows where this film is kept, then I'm gold. I got nothing to worry about. So the IMF has to take both of those away from him. Very, very logical. They put him in a situation where he's presumed dead. Okay, so he's not alive anymore. And they say that, you know what, Leona's gone into business for herself. She's taken over your deal. So now you don't have any potential leverage because she's got the key and she knows where the film is. There is a degree of difficulty to this mission. I like that as well. There's a counterpoint to that, which I'll come back to. Again, while this is a simple mission, they got to find that negative and they got to turn it over to the authorities. It's not easy. And I like missions like that. I've mentioned it before when it arises. Also good. Robert Ellenstein and Bradford Dillman as the guest stars. I've mentioned that, it's not possible to have a bad episode with Robert Ellenstein in it. Maybe it just works out that way, but I've never seen one. Bradford Dillman we've seen once before. I read where he's actually really, really good friends with Peter Graves. I don't know whether maybe he had other commitments and why he wasn't on the show more often. We only saw him back in season 2, at the end of season 2, in the episode called Recovery. And he wasn't on the show in between now and then, and he's not going to come back. Maybe he had other commitments. But he's really good in this episode. He plays his role really, really well. I also like, I've mentioned over the last few episodes in season 6, and I'll mention it again as we go on, that there are some very, very questionable casting decisions in this season. This is not one of them. Brooke Mills, the actress who plays Leona, is a perfect woman for Casey to impersonate. They have the same height, same size, same kind of build. Really, really good casting decision here. They have similar hair, everything, and that was a really good decision. So kudos on the producers for finding somebody who really, really fit the part. Moving on to some things that were not so good. I mentioned that the degree of difficulty in this mission is good. The counterpoint to that is that there is an overall lack of risk in this mission. Edison and Wojciech are a bit on the lame side. They're not schmucks, they're not unengaging, but they are lame. And the lameness comes from the fact that they are predictable and can be manipulated fairly easily. And the reason for that is that they have both of them have a very, very single-minded focus. They're both focused on that film for different reasons, but that's what it is. So it's easy for the IMF to use that to execute the plan. And really, the lack of risk for the IMF is because of the well-executed plan. So, even to the point where one thing that I found really, really strong in terms of the IMF plan, the scene in Leona's apartment. The IMF even plan ahead for the idea of, they have to have this in the back of their heads. that, Edison is not going to do this easily. He's going to come to Leona's apartment. He's going to force Leona, really Casey, of course, to get the key. And the IMF doesn't know where it is. So somehow we are going to have to maneuver him where he's going to have to get the key himself. And that was really that's not an easy thing to pull off. To have Edison take Casey, towards the bedroom for her to pick up a gun and threaten to shoot him. All of that comes together because of the other stuff that the IMF has done. She gets to tell him that, look, I can shoot you now. You're already dead, so I got nothing to worry about. All of that. And at that very, very key point, all of that IMF planning comes together. And I like the way that they engineered that part of it. From the standpoint of how they pulled it off, that's good. From the counterpoint, though, is that level of planning and execution means there's really no risk for the IMF here. There's nothing that went wrong or probably even could go wrong. If there was, I don't see it. In the same vein, even though it is a great story, there's not a lot of new ground covered here. This one, is kind of, it takes from, or is a derivative of, as I've already mentioned, quite a few other episodes. The teamwork is decent, but this plot has a lot of cookie cutter elements to it. And we're starting to see that, to put it bluntly, maybe the writers are kind of running out of ideas here. And this seems like there is a little bit of that going on, unfortunately. There are some plot holes here that I kind of thought about. First of all, I was going to point out a plot hole, but then I kind of thought better of it, about why Wojciech's thugs leave Casey as Leona alone in her building after they, smack her, threaten her, that kind of thing. But then they say, okay, well, you better do the right thing, lady. And they kind of leave her alone. I know that they still keep a watch on the apartment, of course. But I was saying to myself at first, shouldn't they stay with her and say, we're going to be right here until you give us that key, lady? But then I thought about it. And I said, this is not a situation where Wojciech and his men can afford to strong-arm her in that way, right? Larry Edison is disincentivized, and Leona is also disincentivized to give them any information. Even if she tells them, there's certainly no guarantee that they're not going to kill her or hurt her anyway, right? So, I guess that's a reason. That's not that much of a plot hole in and of itself. And even Barney points out, Casey calls him and says, should I be worried about this? And Barney's like, no, they're not going to bother you. They just want the information. They just want the key. But the big plot hole that I did see in that scene, at that point in the episode, was why didn't they bug Casey's phone? Or why couldn't Wojciech put a tap on her phone? Would that not be a really, really, really simple and straightforward thing to do for a guy in Wojciech's position? He's got operatives in the prison. Why wouldn't he have people in the phone company or something like that he could reach out to? That way he would know when Larry Edison called that he was still alive. Even if it might have been suspicious, I don't think so because it's been done before. Even if it was too difficult for the guys to bug the phone, they could have put a bug somewhere in the apartment. I don't think that would have been such a big deal, and that is a plot hole that should have been done. Further to that, why did the thugs not take apart some of the furniture? They don't want to leave any evidence that they had searched the apartment. That makes sense for all sorts of reasons because they don't want to tip Leona off. But under the circumstances, they could have done some cursory checks. Taking apart the leg of a chair, for example, doesn't seem like that would have been a huge thing for them to do. So that bothered me a little bit. You might be able to argue that either way. Also, towards the end of that scene, actually it's in the last act, the IMF learns once Edison takes off and goes to get the film. The IMF learns that Wojciech is following them and trailing Edison as well. And Jim kind of acts a little bit surprised about that. or Casey does, I think. Between the two of them, they act surprised. And I'm like, why would you be surprised at that? They put the plan in motion. They know that Wojciech is watching the building. He'd be stupid not to. That was weird. It bothers me a little bit when the IMF seems a little bit clueless about why did the bad guys do this? What's up with that? That is bothersome to me. It's happened several times this season. It reminds me of the episode from a bit ago, the Miracle, where Jim is somehow surprised that he had a shotgun pointed at him and probably would have been shot had it not been for Willie. Just bizarre, in my opinion. I also just wanted to make a little bit of a note. We've had some recycled sets over the years. That's just a natural thing. But here, it's a little bit excessive. And clearly, this was due to budget issues. This episode was filmed fairly late in the season. It was almost like, I think, the second or third last filmed in the season. So I'm sure that there were, budget concerns and constraints in this. The ending takes place in a movie warehouse, which is obviously a Paramount movie warehouse, something they didn't have to pay for, as a set or anything like that. I'm 99% certain, for example, that Vincent Wojciech's office is the same as the office that Mr. Clegg had in The Connection from a few episodes ago, just with some different decor. The way that balcony door works, that's behind Wojciech's desk, that kind of gives it away, to me anyway. I'm quite certain. We're also going to get, although it doesn't show up here, the apartment from the last episode, The Bride, with that staircase coming down. You watch out for that, because you're going to see that quite a bit in the end of season 6 and also in season 7. Leona's apartment is the same as Whitmore Channing's from Invasion. Everything is virtually identical. You can see it, right away when you look at it. So I just thought I'd throw that in there in terms of the deal with these recycled sets. It's a bit of a harbinger of things to come, as the budget, I'm sure, decreased by this time and will probably continue to decrease going into season 7. Anyway, I think I've said what needed to be said about this one. Good story, not a lot of originality, but a decent and cogent way to take a lot of previous episodes and put them together and derive something that at least where the story works, even if there are some, questionable things that go on. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Please like this episode review. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And please leave your comments. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.